Welcome to meeting number 68 of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room as well as remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the members as well as the witnesses as well. Please do wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please do mute yourselves when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom is at the bottom of your screen, and you do have a choice of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, September 21st, 2022, the committee commences its study of Canada's sanctions regime. It is now my great pleasure to welcome before us today from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development, we have Alexandre Levesque, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy. We have Marie-Josée Langlois, the Director General, Strategic Policy Branch, and we have Stephen Burridge, the Director of the Sanctions Policy and Operations Coordination. Mr. Levesque, as I understand, you'd like to go first. You will be provided a maximum of 5 minutes for your remarks, after which we will proceed to questions from the members. And when you are getting close to the time limit, I will be holding this up, so we'd be grateful if you wrapped it up as soon as possible. That having been said, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honourable members, I'm very happy to be here before the committee as part of this study.
Robust sanctions response to recent and ongoing global events. This is a very timely opportunity to reflect on Canada's sanctions regime. I was pleased to speak to members of the Senate Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Trade last fall as part of their 5-year legislative review of Canada's autonomous sanctions legislation. As you know, that committee very recently published its report and recommendations, which we are reviewing closely. We're keen to build on their work, as well as your own, to best position Canada to effectively and efficiently develop, impose, implement, and enforce sanctions. As you know, Canada has 2 pieces of legislation for imposing autonomous sanctions: the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, or JVCFOA, commonly known as the Magnitsky Act, and the Special Economic Measures Act, or CEMA.
In the years that have elapsed since the committee first last studied the sanctions regime in 2017, Global Affairs Canada has taken significant measures to improve the regime's management and consistency, including implementing a specialized capacity for policy and operations associated with the sanctions. That capacity has made it possible to accomplish a number of things, such as strengthen the consistency and coordination of the Government of Canada's approach to its sanctions policy, and support Canada's commitment to its key allies, facilitate a more rationalized process or processes for applications for licenses being eliminated from the list, certificates and their assessments, and raise awareness among the public and private sectors in Canada about how to engage in international trade in compliance with Canadian sanctions.
The global landscape has changed dramatically, and with it, the sanctions environment has undergone an unprecedented transformation. With this shift, the demand and challenges associated with implementing, enforcing, and regulating Canada's sanctions regime have expanded exponentially. In this way, I would be remiss not to talk specifically about the use of sanctions since February of last year, following Russia's unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine. Since that time, Canada has imposed new sanctions on more than 1,900 Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian individuals and entities under CIMA through more than 50 sanctions packages. Given the expected protracted nature of the conflict, we anticipate that this will continue. Since January 2022, Canada has also imposed sanctions to respond to situations in Haiti, Iran, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka. Taken together with sanctions related to Russia's war in Ukraine, since the beginning of 2022, Canada has imposed 79 rounds of autonomous sanctions, representing an overall 150% increase in the use of this foreign policy tool over the previous 5 years combined. A significant new development came in June of last year when CIMA and JVCFOA were amended to allow the government to seize, forfeit, dispose, and redistribute assets belonging to sanctioned individuals. Canada is the first, and to this day the only country in the world to pass this kind of legislation. In closing, in many ways, this study could not be more timely. As you know, the events of the last 15 months have taught us a lot and given us more to think about in terms of the future of Canada's sanctions tool. Je vous suis reconnaissant de m'avoir donné l'occasion de...
I'm grateful for giving me the opportunity to appear here today, and I await the results of your work with interest. I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levesque. We now open the floor to questions from the members. And as I understand it, Mr. Chong, you are first. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing in front of us today. I'd like to build on the report, the 2017 report of the Foreign Affairs Committee relating to its recommendations. One of the recommendations was the need for written guidance to the public and private sectors regarding the interpretation of sanctions regulations in order to allow individuals and companies to comply with sanctions regulations. Where are we at with that recommendation? Because when we look at jurisdictions like the United States, for example, the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, publishes detailed interpretive guidance about its sanctions alongside fact sheets. The European Union publishes customized details through its frequently asked questions section on its websites, including standalone documents dealing with the application of measures against, for example, Russia's central bank and many other issues. Where are we at with GAC publishing detailed written guidance, like the Canada Revenue Agency does on interpretation of tax law?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. This is indeed one of the key recommendations that came out of the 2017 report, and I would say that it has been implemented, and it is a continued and ongoing effort. Since that report was issued, Global Affairs Canada did create a standalone page that is connected to the GAC internet page that has detailed Q&A, some information to help guide stakeholders, companies, private citizens. In addition to this, there is quite a bit of outreach that takes place, and we target the financial sector, legal sector, bar association, etc. But having said this, it is something that we continue to strive to improve and to build upon, and you cited some very good models that we have among our partners.
The other recommendation raised by the committee's report of 2017 was that the processing of permits under CIMA be transferred to the same unit within GAC that processes permits under the Export and Import Permits Act. Can you tell us if that has been done?
No, that has not been done. These remain two separate units.
Is there any plans to do that, or at present no plans?
Not at present time. The goal and the vision being to really consolidate all expertise on sanctions in one unit. But
Yeah. Another recommendation related to that was that there be clear service level standards established, and that applicants be made aware in a timely manner online about what the status of their applications are. So, for example, best practice would be the Australian Sanctions Office, which has clear information and a portal through which applicants can see the status of their application. They endeavor to process at a service level of 6 to 8 weeks, while the public is told to generally expect 3 months, and they can also check up through a portal as to what the status of the application is. Is there any plan for GAC to do something similar with applicants under who've made applications for exemptions under CIMA?
I would say there isn't a specific plan to put in place a specific service standards right now. We, of course, always strive to turn these around in best possible times. But I will say the exponential explosion of permit requests that we have received has forced us to prioritize those that are of higher priority and significance.
The workload could be reduced if more of this could be put online through a portal that would reduce the need to interact with applicants to update them on their the status of their applications. Maybe that's why these other jurisdictions have done such things in order to reduce the workload and make things more productive. Final question or set of questions I'd like to ask is, the 2017 report also recommended stronger enforcement of sanctions rules. The government last year in Budget 2022 announced the creation of a Canada Financial Crimes Agency. The UK has announced a similar measure. The UK has indicated that part of their new agency would be dedicated to sanctions enforcement. Is that also the plan of the Government of Canada?
There is indeed a plan afoot on this. I would not do justice to it if I were the one to reply to this, especially given that a number of my colleagues will be here in the second hour of this committee meeting, and will have the expertise required.
This is not the first time I've asked this question of Global Affairs Canada officials, so perhaps the next time we have a discussion about sanctions enforcement, sanctions regime in Canada, that officials would be able to indicate whether or not this new Canada Financial Crimes Agency will have a unit within it for sanctions enforcement. The other question I had relates... Okay, I'll finish there, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. We next go to Mr. Sarai. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for joining us today. It's a very timely discussion to be having right now. Can you kind of describe in the most concise possible manner how the Government of Canada's current sanctions regime and process by which individuals are sanctioned from start to finish? So when we sanction either an entity or a country, what's the process that the Government of Canada uses?
Thank you for the question. It is indeed something I could spend a few hours explaining, but I will do my best at being very concise. Essentially, the autonomous sanctions regime is composed of two pieces of legislation that are similar but complementary, as I said in my remarks, CIMA and JVC FOA. When one of the triggers comprised or included in those two pieces of legislation gets tripped up, and here would refer to when an international actor is seen to be in contravention of gross and systemic human rights violation, having committed grave breach of international peace and security, having committed acts of significant corruption, as well as if another international organization of which Canada is part calls on its members to impose sanctions, we are able to list individuals through a regulatory process under these pieces of legislation. It is important to note that what we need to do is ensure that we have sufficient evidence obtained through open sources to provide a package that respects due process and respect for basically the rights of individuals. When we are able to accumulate such evidence, we put through the system, regulatory system in order in council, which once in effect blocks individuals from having financial, personal dealings with Canadians. So effectively, it freezes their ability to interact economically with any entity in Canada or any Canadian abroad. And of course, the first institutions that are seized with acting on this are the financial institutions that follow this very closely, and usually that leads to an immediate freezing of these individuals' financial assets.
And who decides to impose the sanctions, and what type of sanctions can be imposed?
The decision is the Governor in Council on the recommendation on an application from the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And of course, we provide advice and considerations in this term. If we look at CIMA, for the second part of your question, if you look at CIMA, the types of prohibitions can be anything from an asset freeze, dealings prohibition, import and export restrictions, imposition of limitations on financial services, air travel, shipping bans, arms embargo, and of course, inadmissibility into the country.
And how effective have these sanctions been in achieving their objectives?
That is also a question that I was going to say that actually is the object of some dissertations in the academic world. Because the definition of effectiveness is not a single one. There are various levels of objectives when a country imposes autonomous sanctions. Of course, the ultimate and final objective is to effect a change in behavior by the offending party. It is not the only objective, and there are many interim objectives that can be attained. For example, constricting the ability to act financially, economically, but also it is an important signal that our government can project, can send, that the actions of the malicious individuals or entities are unacceptable in a global context. There are, of course, other ways to signal this. This is a pretty powerful one and very clear one. There is a bit of a shaming factor that comes with it as well. It also helps to send a dissuading element to other potential malicious actions. And finally, I would say it serves as a bit of an inspiration to for other countries that have autonomous sanctions legislation to follow us and to join in our actions. So it really is a multiplicity of potential effects that we would need to assess at any given time. Let's take the case of Russia, for example. Have sanctions been effective? Depending on which of these definitions you observe, I would say yes. Russia's ability to wage its war has been significantly reduced. Russia's economy has shrunk. Over 1,000 international companies have left Russia. And through very strict export controls on dual-use technology, Russia's ability to integrate computer chips and highly sophisticated material into their weapons supply chain has been significantly reduced. So limiting over the long term its capacity to wage the kind of brutal war it is waging in Ukraine.
And what are the potential consequences of sanctions? There's obviously some consequences that come with it.
There are the known and intended consequences, and of course the unintended consequences. One of the consequences we always expect is reciprocity. We do something to them, they do something to us. Impact on our companies, and that's why when permit requests are made, we have to look at the full spectrum of impacts. And then there are the things that we haven't quite thought of because we couldn't think of everything when sanctions are imposed, and then we discover after they are, and that's how we go.
Thank you, Mr. Levesque. We next go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today to talk about their experiences and knowledge. On March 21st of this year, Minister Joly declared that sanctions in response to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia have had results, and I quote, have had an impact on society, and we're seeing a potential regime change in Russia. Canada should isolate Russia economically, politically, and diplomatically. You said a few moments ago that the Russian economy had slowed, but in its April 2023 update, the IMF is predicting a growth rate of 0.27% for Russia. It's equivalent to France and Italy, and higher than Germany's and the UK's. Are sanctions having a genuine effect on the Russian economy? And does the projected performance of the Russian economy, does that not testify to the fact that Russia is succeeding in controlling sanctions through other countries? To take up one of the recommendations of the Senate committee, which is asking that we specify goals with greater precision. What is our precise goal here? Thank you for the question, the triple question. If I understand correctly, you're quite right. These figures from the IMF are figures we've seen as well. I think the comparison that should be made is with a projected growth of the Russian economy before the invasion. Had the invasion not occurred, had the severe sanctions not been imposed, Russia's economic growth would have been well above the 0.7% now projected. So does this halt their economy completely? No. Has it hit the economy hard? Yes. But if we look at the sectors that have been hardest hit, we see different figures. We didn't want to halt the economy but stop the sectors that are most likely to damage Ukraine, and that includes the weapons manufacturing sector. We wanted to take from value chains as much sophisticated technology as we could away so that it could not be used to manufacture weapons. Does Russia have opportunities to work around the sanctions? No doubt. Yes, they absolutely do. And that's how they're financing their war. It is a huge exporter of energy, gas and oil. And many countries still have trade with Russia. They either have their own sanction regimes or none. So we cannot be as effective as when sanctions are universal. This is why it's all the more important to work with our partners and to put pressure on other countries with which we have diplomatic relations, but do not necessarily have independent sanctions in place, but on whom we have some influence. Our goal remains the same: to limit Russia's ability to fund its war, to diplomatically isolate Russia, and ultimately to hold Russia accountable and liable for the destruction it has wrought. That is the point of the efforts made to seize assets. Regarding the seizures, Canada in 2022 became one of the first members of the G7 to include that legislation in its sanctions regime, and the first to apply that recommendation. It was issued by the Council of Europe, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. It is very difficult for us as outside observers to have a really accurate idea of how effective the sanctions regime would have been what is the real value of what has been frozen, what is the real value of what has been seized. But if we understand correctly, so far only one order has invoked seizure powers, and that was regarding assets of 33 million belonging to Roman Abramovich in December of 2022. A press release indicated that Minister Joly was going to ask the court to confiscate the goods to the benefit of the Crown. Where are we on that? And why has that new seizure regime been used only once so far? Thank you for that excellent question. Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right. The estimated value of the bank account in question that we believe is associated with Abramovich, Mr. Abramovich, holds about 33 million Canadian dollars, and that is the only asset to be officially seized. This legislation is new, the authorities are new, and there is no precedent for them yet. That leads to some complexity because we are doing things for the first time. To maximize our chances of success, which is what we're trying to do, we would be ill-served by moving ahead without a very well-structured legal case. That would lead to our inability to permanently seize the assets. You, of course, know that Russian oligarchs are particularly efficient in concealing their assets. This is an account to which a number of international jurisdictions claim access, so that involves other courts.
And a half over, so we're going to have to go to the next member.
My apologies.
For the last member for this particular round, we now go to Madam McPherson. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here today and sharing this expertise with us. This is a study that I brought forward for this committee to look at in May of last year. So I'm glad that we have begun doing this work. I think it's very, very important. I think we all understand the importance of having a effective, transparent, consistent, and effectively enforced sanction regime. I'm not certain that certainly I don't feel confident that that is the case. And I think, as we listen to some of the questions that have come ahead of me, the failure to implement some of those recommendations that came out of the 2017 report are problematic. When committees do this work, when they come forward with recommendations, I know there are 19 recommendations that have come forward from the Senate review. And then those recommendations aren't implemented. That does give me pause about whether or not the government is listening to the important work that parliamentary committees are doing. One of the things that we'd heard from the witnesses to date is the idea that sanctions are used as a signal, that sanctions are used to shame, I guess, those that are being sanctioned. And I would just put out there that without effective enforcement of the sanctions, that signal is very diminished. Without transparency, without consistency, that signal that we are trying to send is greatly diminished. So the first question I have is with regards, again, to that 2017 study. So the committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, recommended that the Government of Canada, quote, properly resource and reform the structures responsible for its sanction regime in order to effectively impose sanctions on targeted states and persons. I'm wondering how many personnel in Global Affairs Canada are working on the sanctions policy and administration today, and how that has changed since 2017.
Thank you for the question. I will give you the number of people who work exclusively on sanctions and are dedicated to our little team. But it is important to realize that sanctions work at Global Affairs is really a matrix management kind of approach, because we work with the geographic leads, we work with the legal folks. So it's difficult to say.
Perhaps maybe even easier would be if you could tell us. Sorry, I know the echo is quite bad, but perhaps you could just tell us the change then, and just if it has more been added since 2017. We know that was a recommendation. Has that happened?
Pre-2017, there was maybe 2 or 3 individuals who did this full-time. Post creation of a dedicated unit, it was around 10 people. And with the new announcement made last October by the Prime Minister to create a beefed-up structure for sanctions management, not just at GAC, but of course in other departments as well, we will increase this significantly. We've already increased by about 50% our staff exclusively dedicated to sanctions, and the goal is to multiply that 2 or 3-fold in the coming months.
Thank you. Can you tell me, why isn't Russia included in the area control list? As of today, only North Korea is on that list. Has the government considered adding Russia to this list? Would it be an extra layer of assurance that Canadian goods are not contributing to the illegal war in Ukraine?
Thank you. This is an important question, but unfortunately falls under a different responsibility, which is the export control section. So I would commit to you to come back to the committee with a written answer, but I would not be able to give you something that would be entirely accurate at this time.
Thank you. A written answer would be great. Thanks. When I started, I did talk a little bit about consistency, and we do know, and I'll just read it out to you, that the Senate recommended that the Government of Canada should seek to be consistent in its global application of autonomous sanctions imposed in response to human rights violations. So we have seen over the past several years that Russia, Iran, Myanmar, Venezuela, Haiti, Sri Lanka, that individuals have been sanctioned from those countries, but noticeably absent from our list are countries where clear human rights abuses are occurring, where there are extremists in government, or there have been threats to international peace and security. And of course, right now I'm thinking of Saudi Arabia in particular, but we've also heard from some Canadians that are calling for sanctions in other areas. For example, in Uganda, where we have seen their recent anti-LGBTQ2+ legislation, or in Israel, where we have seen illegal settlements happening. So I'm wondering, could you provide more clarity on how that happens? Because there's very little clarity for Canadians on the decision-making process on how sanctions are applied. They don't seem to be consistent at this point.
Thank you. And we definitely took note of that recommendation in the Senate reports. Of course, we're peeling through this very diligently, and it's definitely a recommendation we want to take on board and see how we can increase the consistency. What I would say is that I would kind of reverse the proposition on its head and say sanctions is one of many tools we have in our toolkit to intervene, to signal, or to have punitive impacts on countries. So what really the starting point is, what interests and vulnerabilities do we have in any given relationship, and what is the series of tools at our disposal to have that greatest impact? That's where it starts. Sanctions come in as one of the possible tools, and we are there to provide the support, the advice, the considerations, the potential ramifications when the geographic leads, the people responsible, let's say, for the bilateral relationship with Saudi Arabia or with Iran, etc., look for additional tools to apply pressure. And on Saudi Arabia, I would say we may not have a sanctions regime on the country itself, but we have imposed Magnitsky sanctions because of human rights violations due to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi a few years ago. So it is an example of a tool we've used without listing the country as a whole. We've been very targeted and have listed the individuals that were believed to be culpable of that horrible murder.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. McPherson. We now go to the second round. For the second round, each member will be provided 4 minutes, and we start off with Mr. Epp. You have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to pick up on the theme of effectiveness. Obviously, that's one of the purposes of this study as well. Specifically to Russia's war machine, have there's been any evaluations specifically to do that? And I note that, suicide drones have been sourced from Iran, and I believe in your opening comments, you referenced some of the sanctions applied to players in Iran. They've also been getting ammunition from North Korea. Can you talk about, I didn't hear North Korea in that opening list of sanctions. Can you comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Yes, we are constantly assessing the impact, not only because we want to make sure what we're doing has the greatest possible impact, but also to see how we can adjust adjust the tools and see which targets we can identify to weaken the war machine. Of course, Russia does not have the most readily available data on its trade, on its it's not exactly an open government. So the sources of information are complicated to obtain. But what I would say, that's where the alliances with like-minded countries, and we have the United States, United Kingdom, European Union, and a few others that collect information, that look at trade flows. So it's not just about looking what dealings Russia has, it's about looking at the countries we suspect are dealing with Russia and seeing if there are anomalies among those.
Thank you. You also talked about unintended consequences of sanctions. Certainly Canadians are grappling with high food prices. One of the contributors there is the tariff that we applied to Russian fertilizers and Belarusian fertilizers. Has there been any analysis on the impact of that specific sanction on Russia's impact versus the cost here to our own food systems? I note that our allies seem to have made an analysis and come to a different conclusion than we have.
Thank you. There was a clear determination that was made, and I believe this was announced publicly by the Prime Minister a number of months ago, that we would exclude from the shipping ban or from sanctioned goods anything that goes into food production, precisely because of the concern this would have, the additional pressure it would have on food prices. So that is explicitly not something we will prevent the trade of, is Russian or Belarusian fertilizer.
Okay. So the under CEMA provides for those exceptions to be noted. We've discussed at this committee the Gazprom turbines before. Are there any other exceptions that have been granted dealing specifically with Belarus and Russia regarding the war that we're not aware of, excluding the two that we just talked about?
I would say every case is unique, and that's why permits are always assessed on a case-by-case basis. But I would say as a general rule of thumb, what we look at when there are requests for exemptions, for permits, or for confirmation of no prohibition, is we look at the significance of granting the permit for Canadian interests and safety and security versus the significance of not.
Can you identify any specific?
Anything that would affect our national security or, for example, critical supply chains, let's say.
So there have been others that have been granted?
Yes.
Okay, and can you list any specifics?
For commercial confidentiality reasons, we're not at liberty to share those, but I can say that there are others. Whenever critical Canadian interests are concerned, we take that into consideration, and we have granted other permits. Yes.
Can you comment? I mean, we are together with our Western allies, our NATO allies, in coordinating our sanctions. Has that led to other countries outside of that alliance also joining with our Western sanctions? And can you comment on that effectiveness?
Yes, indeed. So I named the usual suspects, if you will, with which we really coordinate very closely, and that's the U.S., European Union, and the UK. Very few countries have autonomous sanctions regimes. Japan, I believe, has one. Australia, New Zealand, they're smaller players, but we coordinate with them as well. And then it's the exchange of information, even with countries that don't have their autonomous sanctions regime. So through the G7, NATO allies, Five Eyes, there's a lot of exchange of information there. Yeah.
Thank you. We next go to Ms. Vandenbelt. You have 4 minutes.
here today and informing us about how this is functioning right now. And I noticed, Mr. Levesque, that you mentioned that there are 1,900 Russian, Belarusian officials that have been sanctioned. Could you tell us what the situation would be then for Iranian officials?
I do have these numbers. If you will just give me a second. I believe that for Iran, we have a total of 156 individuals and 192 entities listed under our autonomous sanctions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know that's of great concern to Canadians. And what about Haiti? What is the current situation for Haiti?
The number of individuals to this day that have been sanctioned in Haiti is 19.
Okay, and these would be what are known as oligarchs, the ones that are behind the gangs and yeah.
Correct. It's a mix of individuals involved in business, so what the equivalent of oligarchs would be in Haiti, as well as former politicians who were seen to be influential, could make a difference for the better, but instead chose to maintain chaos, destruction, and terror.
Thank you very much. No, I appreciate that. Could you tell us how Canada's sanctions regime, including CIMA and the Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, Magnitsky, how does this compare to some of our like-minded allies, like the U.S., the U.K., Australia, maybe some others?
Thank you. I would say that our sanctions regimes have a lot in common. But every legislation is slightly different. We have unique triggers, and I spoke about our 4 triggers before. Other countries will have slightly different one. Other countries will have different thresholds of acceptability. What constitutes a sufficient evidentiary package? Every time we put through an order in council that proposes a new regulation to list the sanctioned individuals, we challenge ourselves. We are challenged by the Department of Justice to make sure that we are not doing so irresponsibly and with enough evidence, always from open sources. Some other countries are prepared to accept classified information to document their listing. So there's a lot of similarities, but very different mechanisms and very different delays depending on which country you're talking about. In the case of the European Union, they have to agree to everything 27 times before they go forward, which slows them down significantly.
I'll share the rest of my time with Mr. Zuberi.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today. In terms, just to pick up on the first set of questions of Ms. Vanderbilt, you talked about Russia and Iran. I'm wondering for China, and with respect to what's happening to Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and Uyghurs, the number of sanctions there, and in those specific categories, if they affect those specific categories.
Apologies. By memory, I want to say it's 4 individuals and 1 entity. Yes. Okay, thank you.
For the Uyghur and for Tibet, any?
I am not sure. No, we're going to have to come back to you with. I don't want to mislead you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go for 2 minutes to Mr. Bergeron.
Very quickly, since I have so little time, I'd like you to complete your answer on Mr. Abramovich and perhaps tell us about the sanctions applied on people who promote corruption, violence, and weapons trafficking in Haiti. According to reports from the RCMP, it seems nothing has been frozen relating to Haiti. So could you enlighten us, please? Well, you had asked why has only 1 asset been seized. The simple answer is access to information. Oligarchs are very good at concealing their assets. They're not listed under their own names. So that is one of the greatest barriers. But surely you could have frozen more. You Well, there are bank accounts that were automatically frozen by financial institutions. There are hundreds, even thousands, financial transactions that have been frozen, and they're only a few hundred or a few $1,000 transactions. But those were transactions caught by the institution. For example, a sanctioned Russian bank, any financial transaction coming from that bank will be frozen, even if it's somebody's aunt sending money to a niece for tuition. So we have to clean that up to make sure that we don't have unfortunate repercussions affecting people who have no guilt whatsoever for anything. What about Haiti? Well, technically, as soon as a round of sanctions is announced, assets are officially frozen. No Canadian can engage. Are they seized at that point? No.
McPherson, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With my very short time, I'll ask you a series of quick questions. I'd like to follow up just on what my colleague, Mr. Epp, had been asking you about with regards to the permits. I know you can't give us specific information, but can you tell us how many requests for those permits have been brought forward, how many have been approved, and what the time frame is for those decisions to be made?
I thank you for the question. I don't have the precise number with me. I would say the number of requests have probably been in the dozens. I would have to come back with a precise number on for what has actually been approved. And of course, there's a distinction here. Are we talking only Russia? Are we talking Iran, Sudan? We have, I think, 16 different countries under sanctions. So I would need to do a drill down.
If you could provide that in writing to us, and if you could break it out by country, that would be great for us. Just how many have been requested and how many have been approved. That would be fantastic. And really quickly, and I'm sorry, but I have such little time, could you spend a little bit of time telling us about how Global Affairs Canada interacts with the RCMP and CBSA on enforcement? How often are you meeting? How does that recommendation process work?
Thank you. That was a key recommendation, and I think one of the most important developments. So we now have frequent exchanges. The modification of the legislation has allowed also for greater sharing of information, which really enhances our ability to target, especially in the context of seizure and forfeiture legislation, to target individuals and to do a deeper drill down. We have also established an interdepartmental governance committee on which we chair, and of course, important departments there are departments of finance, the RCMP, and a number of law enforcement agencies. So I would say the cooperation has greatly increased and improved, and that is absolutely key to our success. And we continue to find ways to improve that coordination because it's absolutely what we need for greater efficiency.
Clearly for enforcement. Thank you very much.
We next go to Mr. Chong for 4 minutes.
I'd like to build on MP McPherson's questions. So, who is the lead within the Government of Canada for the enforcement of sanctions? We know that GAC is the lead for designating individuals and entities to be sanctioned, but who is the lead for the enforcement of sanctions? Is it GAC or is it the RCMP and CBSA?
GAC is the regulator, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs is the overall administrator of the sanctions regime, so has an oversight role. But of course, GAC does not have a law enforcement capacity, so enforcement, investigation, etc., is under the purview of the RCMP and public safety.
Okay, and CBSA included.
Of course,
Yeah.
Sorry, yes.
And so just to be clear here, so you are saying that the RCMP and CBSA are the lead for sanctions enforcement, not GAC. GAC just plays a coordinating role.
Again,
who is the lead within the machinery of government? Who convenes the meetings? Is it like if there's to be interdepartmental coordination, central agency coordination, is it GAC that takes the lead on that through its Sanctions Policy and Operation Coordination Division, or is it the RCMP, or is it the CBSA?
Again, I'll say the Minister of Foreign Affairs is the regulator, is the responsible authority for this. But
Okay.
I think I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Ms. Langlois, who could give you a more specific answer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. As you know, the different authorities for the various elements of the sanctions regime are situated across various departments. And it very much depends on what we're talking about. For example, an investigation, if it's for the case of a Canadian that has done something that contravenes the law, would fall under criminal police powers.
Yep.
And therefore go to the right agency, which is the RCMP.
But GAC would be the lead in any interdepartmental agency coordination.
We would coordinate on elements in which we can get involved. We
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to have information
Well,
on
let
investigations.
me give you a parallel example. I think the United States is far more effective at enforcement. The State Department, like GAC, makes the decision on who to designate, whether individuals or entities, for sanction regulation. But it's the Treasury Department that is the lead on enforcement through OFAC, their unit that enforces sanctions. It's very clear. If there's to be any interdepartmental coordination, any coordination with law enforcement, it's Treasury that leads the coordination effort. And it seems to me there's a problem within the machinery of government in our system where, if I look at it, we've got, GAC designating individuals and entities to be sanctioned, and then it's not clear who the lead is within the machinery of government for all of the interdepartmental and agency coordination. We have the RCMP and CBSA who are responsible for enforcement, but GAC also has the overall administrative responsibilities you're telling me. We have this Sanctions Policy and Operation Coordination Division within GAC, which has received, along with the RCMP, some $76 million last October from the government. But at the same time, we have in Budget 2022 last year, the government announcing a new Canada Financial Crimes Agency, and nobody can tell me how that relates to sanctions enforcement. And then we also within GAC have the Export and Imports Permits Division that is also enforcing, that's also responsible for processing applications for import and export permits, separate from applications under CIMA and other sanctions legislation. So it just seems to me that there's a problem within the machinery. Doesn't seem to be a single lead to coordinate interdepartmental and agency coordination. I think, to me, that seems to be a big problem. So I'll just finish on that Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. And for the last question, we go to Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank the witness for coming, but there are still so many questions. I think the whole concept of what a sanction is in question here. What is a sanction? How do you define it appropriately so that everyone knows what that sanction is? How do you decide who in a country is going to be sanctioned? For instance, if you have a country like Russia that is in fact violating all of the international law and waging war against another country, how do you decide exactly who in that country is sanctioned? Because you cannot sanction everyone. And so the question then is, if Vladimir Putin and the Russian government is waging war against Ukraine, do you sanction the army? Do you sanction generals? Do you sanction his parliament? Do you sanction the Duma? How do you decide who to sanction? Because I think a lot of people fear that if you sanction, like, for instance, Russia, that any Russian is going to be sanctioned just because they happen to be Russian. So how do you make those decisions?
Very much for the question. The first part on what is a sanction, I think, is interesting because if you look at our legislation, the word sanction is actually not used. It is a generic term that countries kind of understand what it refers to. It's an imposition of limitations on individuals, but we generally talk about economic measures, because if effectively, and sanctions can be, of course, of other types, but the main output of our legislation is to limit the dealings, the economic dealings between a listed individual and Canadian entities.
And how do you list those individuals? How do you list those individuals?
Through orders in council and the publishing of the names. And to answer the second part of your question is how you decide. This is done on the basis of what we want to accomplish. And again, that's why it's a flexible tool, but not the only tool that we have when we want to send a message or to restrict the ability of a country to act maliciously. In the case of Russia, for example, we have close to 2,000 individuals and entities listed, and it pretty much covers all the categories you included below. It's the individuals that are close to President Putin. It's the individuals in the Duma. Hundreds of them are listed because they have the ability, either they are complicit, and we know because of their voting record in the Duma, or we know they have the ability to change things, and we want to exert pressure on them to apply pressure on the regime. Or it's been oligarchs because we know of their proximity to the regime and their, first of all, the fact that they've gained from a criminal regime, and secondly, because they have an ability to put pressure in turn on political decision makers. So it's kind of all of the above.
Thank you. I wanted to focus a little bit on the fact that you say people who are close to Vladimir Putin. Now, does that mean his family? Because, again, people are suggesting that if you are going to deny visas to certain people, we're not only talking about economic sanctions. If you're going to deny visas to come to Canada or deny refugee status, what if people within Mr. Putin's family don't agree with him? What if they quietly disagree with him? What is your intelligence source? And what have you learned, say, from looking at how you were successful or not successful in the Magnitsky sanctions? How have you learned anything? And how do you ensure that flexibility isn't so flexible that it brings in innocent people? And I think that's what makes people afraid.
Very good. Yes, family members of some Russian leaders and oligarchs are also listed when we have reasons to believe that they benefit from the proceeds of their illicit activities. But that's the thing. We list individuals that we have very good information on that leads us to believe of their culpability by association. It is absolutely not a tool to block all Russians from coming into the country or from having dealings with Canadians. That's why we have to be very diligent about how we find the information before we list such individuals.
Mr. Chair, what?
I'm afraid you're way out of time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So allow me to thank our three witnesses. Thank you very much, Mr. Levesque, Madame Langlois, and Mr. Burridge. Very grateful for your expertise and for appearing before us today. So we will be moving to the second panel of officials, and we will suspend for approximately 3 to 4 minutes just to allow them to assume their seats. And for everyone who's joining us virtually, there's nothing you got to do. You can just remain on the current link. Thank you. So welcome back to our resumption of the study of the sanctions regime in Canada. We have quite a few officials here helping us navigate our way through this regime. So we have from the Canada Border Services Agency, Mr. Fred Gaspar, who's the Vice President, Commercial and Trade Branch. We have Mr. Richard Sam Marseille, the Director General, Immigration Policy and External Review. And then from the Department of Finance, we have Mr. Jeremy Weil, the Acting Senior Director of the Financial Crimes Governance Operations. From the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, we're grateful to have with us today Ms. Annette Ryan, the Deputy Director, Partnership Policy and Analysis. We also have Stéphane Sirard, the Assistant Director, Program Delivery and Modernization. as well as Durley Levertu, the Manager of International Relationships, and Michael Jean Almond, the Manager Strategic Intel and Research Analytics. And finally, from the RCMP, we have the Chief Superintendent, Richard Burchill, who is the Director General of the Financial Crimes Division, as well as Dennis Baudouin, the Director of the Financial Crime Division. Now, I understand that no one would like to make opening remarks, which leaves us with more time for the members to ask their questions. We first go to Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to build on some of the questions I asked to the first panel, so thank you for appearing. In the United States, the State Department has the lead responsibility for the designation for sanctions designation, but the Treasury Department has the lead role for the administration and coordination and enforcement of sanctions. Here in Canada, Global Affairs, like the State Department, is the lead for sanctions designation. So we know, obviously, that the RCMP and CBSA have the lead for enforcement of sanctions. But my question is slightly different. It's who is the lead for interdepartmental agency coordination on sanctions enforcement? Who is the lead for that interdepartmental and agency coordination? Yes?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Chong. It's an iterative process, and certainly officials have great working relationships, and there are working level committees and regular committees. There is no one person who is in charge of interdepartmental organizational models, but I can certainly tell you that there is no organizational barrier to us working well together. We do it every day.
Well, I would suggest that that in itself is a problem. There needs to be a lead department or lead agency that is responsible for the administration, the coordination, and the enforcement of sanctions. Because as we've seen in other cases, if there is no lead, things get lost in the shuffle. The buck has to stop somewhere on enforcement. And in my view, Mr. Chair, is that one of the reasons why we don't do that well in sanctions enforcement is because of that problem within the machinery of government. You know, we have a number of new initiatives coming online to try to beef up our enforcement of sanctions. And if, you know, that's just going to add to the organizational complexity of the current system, which is already complex. So, you know, I think about the new federal beneficial ownership registry that's going to be coming online. That's going to be under the industry department. We've got the proposed new Canada Financial Crimes Agency. That will be another organization within the machinery. And if there's no lead, you know, with those proposed entities, with FINTRAC, with GAC, with public safety, then, you know, I think it's going to lead to weaker enforcement. Perhaps I could ask you a question on this Canada Financial Crimes Agency, which was announced over 12 months ago. Where is that going to fit into sanctions enforcement?
And if I may, I'll just go back. Maybe I can shed some light on your first question. And the RCMP's view, GAC is the lead on sanction. I think enforcement encompasses two prongs. And as far as sanction evasion becomes criminal, the RCMP and CBSA are definitely the lead to investigate criminality. As far as deciding who is designated, which asset is going to be frozen, if it's going to be forfeited, it falls under Global Affairs.
Yeah, but if FINTRAC's not giving you the information you need, then whose responsibility is it to lead the charge on fixing that flow of information?
As of now, I know there's measure announced, and maybe Jeremy is better placed.
Happy to add a bit of context. As you noted, and I listened to your questions earlier, Budget 2022 announced the creation of the Financial Crimes Agency, and Budget 2023 provided a bit of an update. Our colleagues at Public Safety Canada are currently developing options for the potential scope and mandate of such an agency. What I'm privy to at this point is that sanctions evasion as a financial crime, just like fraud, just like money laundering, just like terrorism financing, is in the potential universe of the sorts of crimes that such an agency could potentially, provide support on, be it from an advisory capacity or an enforcement investigation
That's helpful.
capacity.
Can you tell me when that agency is going to be stood up?
I think Budget 2023 promised Canadians an update in the Fall Economic Statement 2023.
Budget 2022 promised that in the Fall Economic Statement of last year, and we never got it. So, do you have any more sense of when this agency is going to be stood up?
I'm sorry, I don't have any more for the committee in terms of timing, except that there will be more to share in the fall.
Just back to this question, though, of information flows. So if FINTRAC isn't providing the RCMP with the information it needs, who's responsible for ungluing that stuck problem?
Listening back to the previous session, Mr. Levesque mentioned that it really is a shared effort, a collective effort. That's why sort of you have all of us here today.
That's a problem. I mean, we had the same issue with evacuating Afghans with an enduring and significant tie to Canada. There was clearly a lack of interdepartmental coordination. I'm hearing similar things here. I think there is a machinery problem. There has to be a lead within the Government of Canada on enforcement. And if it's GAC, so be it. Or if it's public safety, so be it. But when we're adding on complexity to the system with a new registry and with a new financial crimes agency, if we don't clarify who is the lead within the Government of Canada, who can be hauled on the carpet to explain why sanctions are not being enforced, I think it'll be all for naught. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chong. We next go to Mr. Zuberi. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you for being here today, and to all of you. I know it's a large panel.
Next. Rob, you're next.
I'd like to pick up on just some brief line of questioning I had earlier on for the previous panel. We have Canada announced that 4 individuals and 1 entity are on the sanctions list because of grave and serious crimes that are being committed towards Uyghur people in China. I'd like to know about we have listed those individuals and 1 entity. What are the impacts of that? If anybody can respond to that. What are the real impacts in terms of what has happened as a result of those listings?
I'm sorry, I guess I would just intervene to say probably a question that would have been better put to Global Affairs Canada in the previous panel. I don't think where I sit at the department and my enforcement colleagues would have any information to that effect.
The reason why I asked this panel is because we learned that Global Affairs chooses who is on the sanctions list, but I believe you are responsible for the enforcement of it. Am I correct?
Thanks for your question. I can speak to that from the immigration perspective in particular. So from an immigration perspective, I think as the committee would note, we were just here a couple of weeks ago on Bill S-8. So there is a legislative gap on the inadmissibility side of the sanctions provision. So sanctions issued for a breach of peace and international security today do not trigger inadmissibility. If Bill S-8 were to reach royal assent, they would trigger inadmissibility. And similarly, with respect to entities, that's also a gap that would be closed if Bill S-8 reaches royal assent, which aligns with recommendation from Parliament in the 2017 report. The other, if I may just take a moment to address the interdepartmental coordination aspect. From an immigration perspective, the policy responsibility for inadmissibility for sanctions is in the IRPA under the Minister of Public Safety, and it's the CBSA that will do the interdepartmental coordination with GAC. We consult on the development of the regulations, and then we ensure that our systems with the Immigration Department are updated to ensure that lookouts are entered for people who are inadmissible so that we all are able to effectively enforce those provisions on the immigration side.
Mr. Chair, if I could respond on the financial side from a FINTRAC perspective, I would build on the response from my colleague at GAC, who spoke about the economic measures having an impact commensurate with the economic relationship with Canada. So to the extent that the individuals that you speak to would have financial dealings with Canada, we in FinTrack would have essentially measures in place to ensure that financial institutions build these considerations into their risk management frameworks, and that they take appropriate measures to limit their business dealings with such individuals, and that they take appropriate steps to report any problematic transactions or ownership of property to the RCMP in the case of sanctions. And I would offer that amongst ourselves, this is quite clear. And, I think we can speak to that in turn as we go along.
Thank you. There was, I'm looking at the list right now of the 4 individuals, one entity. One entity in question in the Uyghur region was the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps Public Security Bureau. It's a construction, it's involved in construction, this entity. It is on our sanctions list. I am curious if there is a dive being done in terms of companies, Canadian companies that may have relationships, and if so, are they being put under the microscope? If people are inadvertently, let's say, entangled with that company, is there something that's being done to disentangle that?
If I may, Mr. Chair, I would say that if the entity has financial relationships with Canada, the provisions would apply via private sector partners in the first instance. If those relationships are through a trade channel, that would be something that CBSA could speak to.
Yes, and on that point, I can confirm that those kinds of companies form part of the type of analysis that our intelligence program does in issuing lookouts and targets for inbound imports. So that is definitely a key component element of import declaration lists that we against which we run our targeting program. And so that is something that's actually core to what we do, and it's information that we share with and exchange with our international trading partners per our customs mutual assistance agreements where appropriate to ensure that there's a cohesive approach.
We've heard that one shipment was stopped but later on permitted to enter that originated from the Uyghur region. This, I know, is not specific to our testimony. I hope to hear what areas of improvement you have for us. I'm sorry I used up all my time, but maybe in your other answers you could share what areas of improvement you have for us. Thank you.
Thank you. We next go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometimes the unclear application of a given measure can have an effect contrary to the desired effect. That's what happened with a component of the order applied in March 2022, which subjected all merchandise coming from Russia or Belarus to a 33% tariff. This was part of what Canada imposed on Russia after it invaded Ukraine. But a large amount of fertilizer imported for agricultural production in Canada and Quebec did come from Russia. In Quebec, almost half of imported fertilizer came from Russia. And it's our farmers who paid the price for importing that fertilizer, and the impact was to increase the prices of Canadian agricultural products and Quebec agricultural products. So, in fact, Russian products were more competitive internationally than Canadian products. When the government of Canada was made aware of this, it promised to compensate Canadian and Quebec farmers. So far, there has been no compensation. There are seemingly ongoing talks with grain producers and the government of Canada, but for now, there are still no measures to support our farmers. And Canadian agricultural products internationally, because of this measure, among other things, are less competitive than Russian products. and that sanction was supposed to penalize Russia. In fact, it's had the opposite effect. We penalized ourselves and helped Russia. So where are we with that?
Mr. Chair, through you, it's certainly true that importers are responsible for paying applicable duties and taxes, be they duties that are normally ascribed through the customs tariff or duties that are done through the Special Economic Measures Act. It is certainly true, and there are unintended consequences when that occurs. I can't speak to any policy considerations that the Government of Canada may have in that regard with regards to compensatory measures, but you're absolutely correct that it is the importer who is liable for paying the applicable duties.
Donc, vous n'êtes pas en mesure.
So you cannot enlighten us on the status of negotiations between Canadian grain producers and the Government of Canada on compensation to mitigate the perverse effects of this measure, which not only penalizes our own farmers but actually helps Russia on international markets. No, I have nothing that I can tell you at the moment. I see. Could you please check with the people involved and provide answers if there are any? Yes, thank you. We'll follow up with our colleagues and come back to the committee. In the last update on sanctions, the RCMP indicated a number of things, specifically that regarding Haiti, the RCMP has not received any information from third parties about what it needed to block. So what are we to understand from that? The RCMP has received no information from the third parties on the subject of blocked assets or frozen assets. This means that when Foreign Affairs lists someone on the sanctions list, banks look through their systems to see if that person has assets in the bank. All Canadian companies have a duty to do this. After that, they have to freeze the assets in question and notify the RCMP. When they notify the RCMP, we essentially count up all the assets. And what that sentence means is that we have received no information that financial institutions or other Canadian companies have frozen any assets. So what are we to understand? Either no assets have been seized so far, or no entity responsible for applying sanctions has seized or frozen anything, or that no entity responsible for freezing and or seizing assets has communicated any information on that. That is correct. So how do we know if anything has been done following sanctions, if any individuals associated with Haiti have had consequences? Well, sanctions were applied to individuals who foster corruptions and weapons trafficking in Haiti. So it all sounds wonderful, but we'd like to see the sanctions actually applied. Can anyone tell us where these sanctions are at and what has been done to the assets of those individuals? I believe that we have certainly expressed a tremendous willingness to apply sanctions. But since the RCMP was not notified that any assets have been seized or frozen, who can actually inform us of what's been done? I think that Global Affairs might perhaps be in the best position of providing that information. I don't want to know why. My question is a different one. Now that we've decided to apply sanctions, you have received no information that they have been sanctioned. So who can tell us whether they have or not actually been sanctioned? Well, the people in question may not have any assets in Canada. I'm just asking whether it would be possible to check on this and come back to the committee.
De toute façon, j'ai posé la question.
I put the question.
So if we could next go to Madam McPherson, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here and answering our questions. And I do have to say, listening to some of the testimony so far, that I'm deeply concerned that the enforcement of the sanctions is a problem. Putting folks on a list and then not enforcing it is not an effective sanctions regime. I'm going to start with some questions for our guests from the RCMP. In 2016, at this committee, the RCMP indicated that they had only one successful conviction under SMEMA since 1992. So the RCMP superintendent at the time, Steve Nordstrom, said that the RCMP, and I quote, has limited resources, and we try to prioritize to address the highest priority projects and crimes, predominantly to prevent the loss of life and investigate terrorist acts that could lead to the loss of life or other such items that do receive a higher priority rating. So when I read that, what I understand from that is that investigations into sanctions violations at the time were not considered a priority. So I'd like to know how many convictions have there been made under SEMA or other sanction legislation since 2017. I'd like to know whether staff numbers for enforcement of sanctions has increased since that time. And I'd also like to know if you would agree with your predecessor that the RCMP has limited resources and has chosen to prioritize other types of crimes.
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. I would say in relation to the resources, I wouldn't say we have limited resources. I would say that we give these investigations, sanctions investigations, high priority. They're a priority for us. They're a priority for our regime partners. And the resources that we have in place, we use to support the sanctions regime to the best of our ability. In relation to other priorities, it's not changed probably since 2016, and that us, like any other organization, has competing priorities, as do we in federal policing. But that's not to say that, number one, we don't apply the resources that we have within the financial crime program to exert the ability that we have in the sanctions investigations. We do that, number one, but on a second level, I would say that we always would welcome the opportunity for increased resources and the ability to further enhance our capabilities in this area. Does that
Could you tell me,
answer the
sorry
question,
to
Mr.
interrupt, I have such limited time. I asked how many staff you have, so whether or not the staff numbers for enforcement of sanctions has increased since 2016, and also if you could provide, and perhaps this is something you can provide in writing to the committee afterwards, but how many convictions have there been under SEMA or other sanction legislation since 2017?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can say that there hasn't been a conviction since the last appearance. And I think what's important to realize is that the use of sanction has only increased dramatically in the last year and a half. What we've observed is an increase in investigation on sanction evasion. Again, this is criminal in nature, and this is for the RCMP and CBSA to conduct these investigations.
But there has been no conviction since 2016. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. My next question before I run out of time is for our guests from CBSA. In August, it was revealed that CBSA disrupted an attempt to send materials to Russia in violation of sanctions imposed following the invasion of Ukraine. This was at the Port of Montreal. The shipment was one of more than a dozen with, and I quote, suspected links to Russian entities, end quote, that the Canadian Border Service Agency said resulted in action. Can you provide to this committee in writing details about the number of attempted shipments seized by CBSA in the last 2 years that were in violations of the sanctions, if you could tell us, and then if possible, provide an estimate of how many you think have been missed?
Yes, absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair, we'll certainly commit to getting back in writing with precise details, but I can tell you now that the CBSA has risk assessed over 700 shipments since the provisions have come into effect, and these are shipments with declared end destination of Russia, and of those, 40 formal detentions have ensued, including a number of seizures and shipments also that were then withdrawn from export. There's definitely more work to be done. There's definitely more that we can always do in that regard, but it is very much an activist posture that we are taking with regards to this mandate.
Thank you for that. And I certainly would also like to know actually how many to other destinations with Russia as the end user. So not just directly to Russia, but to other areas. I have one last question. I hope I have some time to get to this. We've heard from people, particularly with regards to Iran and Haiti, that they want to be able to provide information to the government of Canada about how about folks that have been sanctioned, assets, that sort of information. What would that process look like? Who would they contact? How would they get in touch with the government of Canada if they had information on the sanctions regime?
I can speak to sanction evasion. So we have received complaints from Canadians and others on people that evade sanction. And like I said, we have an increase in a number of files and investigations that we do on sanction evasion. So definitely anybody with information on people evading the sanction regime can contact the RCMP to provide their information.
Or to provide, if there are people that should be added to the sanction list, is that also to the RCMP?
I said earlier, Global Affairs is the lead in deciding who gets listed and designated on, a sanction. So they would be the contact point for this. But I think, as Mr. Levesque alluded, they rely on public information. But so the RCMP is not involved in that process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam McPherson. So now we go to the second round. And for the second round, we go to Mr. Hoback. Mr. Hoback, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. I'm just kind of curious. You say you work really good together, and I'm glad to hear that. So when there's a problem, who calls the meeting?
So speaking with respect to the inadmissibility consequences of sanctions, if there is an issue with the listing, it would be the CBSA that would convene the meeting in that.
So you would chair the meeting, you would assign responsibilities at that meeting?
On the inadmissibility immigration consequences, we would be the lead. If it has something to do with whom is sanctioned or somebody wanting to get off of the sanctions list, that would belong to Global Affairs.
Okay, so then Global Affairs would take the lead in calling meetings if there's something that involves more than one department or two departments? Or public safety?
So Global Affairs certainly would call interdepartment.
Mr. Saint-Marseille, could you just speak into the mic, please?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair.
You can bend it.
I have to get closer.
Closer.
Thanks.
Hold the thing. There you go.
Thank you.
With respect to the immigration provisions, we will call the interdepartmental meetings. If there's an issue with administration of the inadmissibility provision, if it's an issue with respect to whom is listed or delisting, Global Affairs will. I know from experience our colleagues at Global Affairs have called interdepartmental meetings when there's an issue with interdepartmental coordination.
So even though that they don't have necessarily the responsibility, because nobody does, they take the lead. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I would say it would be to them, and they have in the past. I know when the
so you defaulted that to Global Affairs then.
Correct.
Okay. My question is for the RCMP. You talk about capacity and having enough capacity. Yet we just had auto manufacturers come through here, and maybe CBSA might be involved with this, and they're complaining about the theft of vehicles in this region going through the port of Montreal, and CBSA and the RCMP unable to stop it. So if you don't have the capacity to stop something as simple as vehicle thefts being exported out of Canada, how do you have the capacity to take on something more complicated like we see in this type of legislation?
Yes, thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. As it pertains to vehicle theft specifically, a lot of the vehicle theft entry into the country or exit out of the country is through police of jurisdiction. So the RCMP doesn't have a federal mandate with the car theft issue per se, but we do work with our policing partners and use our connections and our multi-jurisdictional international contacts.
Here's an example, though. If you don't have the mandate, if you don't have clear lines of definition on who's responsible, it falls through the cracks. Is that fair to say?
Well, Mr. Chair, what I would say is that it's not that we don't have a clear responsibility. Where the RCMP is the police of jurisdiction, we certainly do. What I'm saying is, as the federal police force in provinces, particularly Ontario and Quebec, we would work with our police of jurisdiction partners to affect any kind of investigation or auto theft investigation, which is separate and apart from a federal policing mandate where sanctions evasion and where we're working with financial crime at a federal level. The resourcing for that particular function would be different. And we're not saying that we don't have people to do it. We're saying that we have, as with any organization, and being a large policing organization, we have competing priorities within federal policing, but we do give
So do we have that same
priority.
issue then in regards to items that are on the sanction list, or people shipping items that would be on the sanction list, where you get into jurisdictional issues, whether it's federal or provincial, or whether it's CBSA, and then how do you resolve who has jurisdiction? So, for example, let's say I stole a car and I'm going to ship it to Russia. Like, who would be the one to prosecute? Who would be the one to stop it? Would it be CBSA? Would it be RCMP? Would it be provincial police?
Mr. Chair, in respect to the question about who would have jurisdiction, where sanctions evasion is concerned, the RCMP has jurisdiction on those investigations. But if we require assistance from police of jurisdiction outside of us being the lead on those investigations, we certainly would engage that help. But we do have the mandate for those investigations.
Do you find it awkward or hard when you're not an established unit that's there consistently in regards to sanctions? Is this something that Canada should have in place at all times instead of just when we feel we need to bring it into a different group? And then, should we have a sanctions department? I'm not sure what you'd call it. I know you're talking about the PHMSA, but that's been announced but never brought forward. Is there the capacity to actually do this in the long term? For example, if we see aggression coming out of Asia into the Pacific, do we have the ability to actually go into our supply chains and say, okay, now these items are all sanctioned? How would we do that? And who would provide that information? Would the CSIS provide the information? Would RCMP provide the information to GAC on who to target?
Very briefly, please.
Probably need 20 minutes to answer that one, eh?
Yeah, as I say, we don't provide any, and there's legality behind it, but we don't provide information to Global Affairs as to who to target and who to list.
You don't collect the evidence for it?
I'm sorry?
You don't collect the evidence for it?
No, I'm not talking about evidence. I'm talking about information for them to decide who gets designated. I think this is a policy decision, and this is why the RCMP.
Okay, so it's policy decision on.
Go back. I'm afraid you're out of time. So we next go to Mr. Oliphant. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here. I think I'm going to come at this a little bit differently than some of my colleagues. We've already been hearing treatments and medications and prescriptions without having done a diagnosis, and we haven't even done symptoms and signs of what the problems are. And so I'm not going to jump to a conclusion that we need a lead, because that's a simplistic answer for me. And what I'd like to know a little bit from you is how we can help you do the job that we want done better. That's our goal. And I would start out by saying it's also Parliament that gives you your resources, not the government. Parliament has done that, and we have estimates here all the time where no one asks questions about what we need to actually give you. And so I'm going to try to help you, to help us to do the job that we share and collectively want to do. So I want estimates. So someday we'll actually talk about money and that kind of stuff, because it's our job to give you the resources you need. I want to start out by saying that the government announced, and Parliament did approve, some $76 million for the sanctions regime, some of it going to Global Affairs on the determination of sanctions, and some of it going to the RCMP on the enforcement, and I believe evidence which is used to determine sanctions as well. I think RCMP are involved before and after to a degree, like what's going on. Can you tell us, is that money enough? Do you need more money? Are you under-resourced? what would be helpful, and I'll give you each a chance to do that, from CBSA to IRCC to FinTrack to maybe start with the RCMP. And this is your time, and then we'll end it when we get there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we did have a say in the 76 million that was announced. We requested money specific to sanction so that we can designate individuals responsible for specific tasks. What we found since then is that sanction evasion is a bigger issue than anticipated. And to go back to my earlier statement, sanction by Canada wasn't widely used as it has been the last 18 months. So again, if you're not sanctioning or designating many people, you're not going to have the same level of sanction evasion. Like, everything is interconnected. So what we found since then is that sanction evasion investigation has increased. Canadians are contacting us with this type of information. It is criminal in nature. It is, as my colleague has said, our responsibility to do it. We have jurisdiction over that crime. So definitely, as if Canada continues its use on sanction, we're going to need more resources to better enforce. And when I talk about enforcement, I differentiate earlier, but I'm talking about sanction evasion, which is criminal.
It's tenfold. I mean, given what we've done in Belarus and Russia and Ukraine, over what we had done in the previous 8 countries where we had sanctions, it's over tenfold. So you need more resources.
Yeah, and I would say that as far as the work comes, it's much more than tenfold.
Yeah.
Because whereas it was seldomly we would get disclosure from the banks, for example, 2 years ago, and these disclosures were very minor. Sure. Now we're getting a lot.
I want to give CBSA a chance.
Answer your question directly, I'm not sure if any official has ever come before you and told you they've got just enough resources. Thank you very much. So if you're willing to, if the purse strings are open, we'll take them. But no.
But take your time to submit what you need to us, because it's not the government that gives you the money; it's Parliament.
Understood.
So
yeah.
Come back to us and talk about this in real terms.
Yeah, and that's really the context I wanted to provide to you. Because the CBSA administers just over 100 different legislative, regulatory, and international treaty requirements at the border, our posture is one to always put in place an effective and appropriate risk mitigation and measurement framework, because we're never going to be able to do everything perfectly all the time. So for us, we've been investing quite heavily in a modernization regime that's really grounded in data, such that we'll be able to respond to volume growth and be able to respond to expanded mandates, to be able to zero in on and apply a risk-based approach that makes sense and is appropriate to the priorities of the Government of Canada, as confirmed to us by the Minister through the mandate letter. So from our perspective, certainly, resources is always a discussion that can be had, but we're not letting that stop us, and it's not something that's preventing us from
Something
effective.
specific, you come back to us. FinTrack?
I appreciate the question. I would say that from a FinTrack perspective. Again, I appreciate the question, and I would say that from a FinTrack perspective, what we appreciate from Parliament is essentially a set of interlocking authorities that let us work with our partners. And specifically, Parliament established FinTrack just over 20 years ago to have a role in terms of sharing information in respect of money laundering, terrorist financing, and threats to national security. What our colleagues at Finance have put before the House in Bill C-47 includes strengthening that mandate to allow our regulated reporting entities to report to FinTrack directly in respect of sanctions and sanctions evasion and property related to sanctions. This will help us work with our partners, and those authorities also...
Authorities for the interconnection.
Authorities are before the House, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do submit. Could I just mention, too, I think we're going to need more than 3 meetings. I just want to raise that, because we're just starting this thing, and I just want to put that on record, because we may need you back to warn you.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 2.5 minutes, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reasoning Mr. Oliphant just put forward is absolutely spot on and realistic, but it's incomplete. It's incomplete in that it is Parliament that grants funding to the government, but that's done on the basis of the government's recommendations. The government explains what it needs, and Parliament grants or does not grant those funds. Parliament can make suggestions, and in 2017, this very committee recommended that the Government of Canada, and I quote, ensure that organizations in charge of implementing the law place a high priority in applying sanctions and receive the resources needed to do so, end of quote. Not 1 cent has been requested by the government of Parliament to do what the committee recommended. It took a Russian invasion until October 2022. 5 years later, the government announced its intent to sign or allocate $76 million to the application of sanctions through specialized offices at GAC and by supporting the RCMP to help it investigate, locate assets, and collect evidence. That is what the $76 million was supposed to be used for. We still don't have the breakdown, and Mr. Oliphant might at some point be able to enlighten us on that. As for the RCMP, you did say that your role was to receive the results of actions undertaken by stakeholders, but according to the definition by the RCMP, this is one of your roles. What are your other roles, since the goal was to make it possible for you to investigate, find assets, receive information? Aside from receiving information, what are your other roles? When we receive information from third parties, we can now share it with Global Affairs. We provide information on goods, assets that have been located in Canada, and it is then up to Global Affairs to decide whether to move on those assets. And if Global Affairs decides to do that, we assist Global Affairs in finding and determining who the assets belong to, in what province they are located, and to collect all the information. That's intelligence work. We then provide the intelligence to Global Affairs, which is responsible for the final decision. That's how our interaction with Global Affairs works. I believe people meet about once a week to discuss priorities and to see what intelligence has been gathered.
Now go to MP McPherson. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Similar to Mr. Bergeron, I was quite shocked to hear that as a opposition member, I have the power to determine the amount of money that goes to different allocations. I certainly would like to see more money go to the CBSA so they could do their work, and certainly would be very interested in reversing our 15% cut for international development. Perhaps we could even invest in pharmacare in this country, now that I know that power is within parliamentarians. All joking aside, I am going to build on some of the questions that have been asked by Mr. Zavari and Mr. Bergeron. Could you please provide in writing to the committee how many shipments from the Uyghur region have been stopped and seized? And perhaps give us some information about how many shipments to Canada have been seized based on sanctions.
Yeah, maybe I think I can speak to, I suspect these are two distinct but somewhat related issues. With regards to the Uyghur region, I suspect the issue more relates to forced labor. And as colleagues will know, the forced labor regime is administered through the customs tariff. And to date, we have had no specific seizures of shipments that have been seized due to forced labor. We have been working with our international partners, including the United States, to be able to identify risks of forced labor shipments and entry. We did have one last summer that was identified and suspected of containing forced labor, but ultimately the importer was able to provide evidence to suggest that that seizure was not warranted. We are working closely also with public safety colleagues and colleagues across the government departments to work towards implementation of Bill S-211 in order to ensure that we're continuing to strengthen the forced labor regime and the child labor prohibition, prison labor as well.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. I just have such little amount of time, but if you could provide that in writing, and certainly I think we can all agree that the United States has been much better at being able to do this work. So it's great that you are working with them. I'd like to ask the next question from the RCMP. What efforts is the RCMP making to trace and uncover the assets of designated persons, and how many people do you have working on this particular effort at the moment?
Yeah, so any resources attached to work on CIMA had to be reassigned from other priorities. But as my colleague has explained, it is a priority for us. So it really depends on the week, but we have a variety, like a number of analysts and police officer, depending on the priorities that are going to be trying to uncover and trace assets. Again, it's twofold. It's to assist GAC in its seizing regime and also on sanction evasion. What I will add is that these criminal investigations are extremely complex. They're international in nature, and often we're at the mercy of gathering evidence in foreign countries that have a history of not collaborating with Canada. So on the question on conviction and cases, we have to understand the geopolitical area that we're dealing with the sanction and the sanction evasion.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chong, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to focus again on enforcement, but this time as it relates to real estate. Money laundering is one part of sanctions evasion, which includes money laundering through Canadian real estate. The Cullen Commission in British Columbia concluded that billions of dollars of money is being laundered through British Columbia, much of it through BC real estate. It's a significant asset class. There's just under $4 trillion in Canadian residential real estate in Canada, and there's a lot of appreciation in that real estate in recent years. So it's a big asset class to launder money through. You mentioned in your testimony that you collect information on property related to sanctions. So my first question is, how does FINTRAC, the RCMP, Public Safety collect information on the beneficial owners of real property in Canada?
Perhaps I can start. So in terms of the beneficial ownership of real property, I would point out...
More specifically, real estate.
And within that real estate, I would point out that as part of our record keeping and reporting requirements for the private sector, there is an onus on regulated entities to determine the beneficial ownership of corporate entities and essentially who is transacting with whom. And so that is an existing provision of our regime that applies to the real estate sector through various different dimensions, be it the financial sector, professionals involved in real estate, and supported by work that we do with various provincial regulators.
So are you satisfied with the information on beneficial ownership of Canadian real estate, with the information that you're being provided, or do you think there are gaps in that beneficial ownership structure?
I would say that we have worked very closely with British Columbia officials as they have established requirements for beneficial ownership information to be part of their real estate registry. We've similarly worked very closely with ISED colleagues as they have worked to
And what about the
establish
province
same
of Ontario, which is by far and away the country's largest real estate market? Where are we at in collecting the beneficial ownership of Ontario real estate?
I would view that as being covered by my previous answer, but happy to expand.
Well, because to my knowledge, there's no beneficial ownership collection of data in Ontario real estate, for example. Is that?
I would be of the view that British Columbia is.
No, I'm talking about Ontario.
Is further ahead than Ontario in that regard.
So I guess my point is that we've got a proposed federal beneficial ownership registry that doesn't cover real estate. In my view, that's a huge gap.
If I may, the logic would be that the federal registry would be approached in a way that would describe the beneficial ownership of corporations.
Yeah,
that
corporations
in turn,
incorporated under the Canada Business Corporations Act, which only covers about 430,000 corporate entities in Canada. It's estimated that there are some 4.3 million businesses in Canada, the vast majority of which are incorporated under the 10 provincial statutes. And so while some provinces have introduced registries to cover those provincially incorporated entities, and some, as in the case of British Columbia, are moving towards including real estate as well in that, there's huge gaps in the federal system. The federal government could use the criminal head of power, it's accorded in the Constitution, to enforce a national registry that would include not only provincially incorporated entities, closing the gap with provinces, for example, like Alberta, but also real estate, through which the Cullen Commission has concluded a lot of money is being laundered and presumably a lot of sanctions are being evaded. So I just put that as a point that I think needs to be considered by the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chong. And for the final question, we go to Dr. Fry. Dr. Fry, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to go back to, never mind the interesting questions to FINTRAC. I just want to go back to C8. I think the question here is, and I'm hearing that everyone works well together and that you're all coordinated, and yet I hear that some people say that they aren't able to do what they want to do and that only GAC can call meetings. What if, for instance, the RCMP find that they are unable to do their job really well and something urgent has occurred? Can they call a meeting? I mean, that's a question I want to ask. But secondly, and most importantly, when you're dealing with so many departments coming together to accomplish something, do you have clear objectives? Do you have an evaluation component to say, are you getting where you want to go? Are you effective? Are you efficient? How do you evaluate whether you are actually achieving what you want to achieve? I think that is the biggest question when you have many departments working together.
Yeah, on the fact whether we can call a meeting, like the answer is quite simple. It's yes. I think Madame Langlois was here earlier. I must have talked to her 2 or 3 times just this week. So, like we know who the partners are, we know who the individuals are in the departments dealing with sanction, and everybody has open communication and can call meetings on any subject as it's needed.
But I still haven't received my answer about, have you got clearly defined goals? Are you able to see whether you're efficient and effective? Are you making a difference? Because I asked a question earlier on, and I didn't have enough time. What have we learned from the Magnitsky sanctions? Have we learned anything? Did we do it right? Did we get the process okay? Did we evaluate our results? What can we do differently? I mean, if we're not learning from what we've done and whether we've made mistakes or not, we're just going to be spinning wheels. Can somebody answer that?
Sam Marseille, did you want to add? It seems like...
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to the immigration consequences of sanctions, the objective is clear that it's to prevent inadmissible people from traveling to Canada in the first place, and if they do arrive in Canada, to effect their removal. And so we do have evidence that the Magnitsky sanctions approach, which is slightly different than what existed for multilateral sanctions prior to the Magnitsky Act, has been quite effective because all identified occurrences of sanctioned individuals have been stopped abroad through the refusal of visas. We don't have any recorded instance of anyone arriving in Canada requiring removal, which was the objective of the Magnitsky approach. And that's why in Bill S8 the government's proposing to align the remaining sanctions provisions with how it's handled in Magnitsky.
So you're saying that you have learned lessons and that you're applying them in Bill C8. Is that what you're saying?
It's Bill S8, but yes.
Sorry, Bill S8. Sorry about that. Okay, well, I think that's it, Mr. Chair. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fry. At this point, I will thank all of our many witnesses who have appeared before us today. Very, very grateful for your time and your expertise. Now, just to remind everyone, next meeting again will be on the sanctions regime. And please do remember to send in your witnesses, your proposed witnesses, for the Wagner Group study by end of day next Tuesday. Thank you.
Just before you gavel, could we at the next meeting just talk about our work plan for this committee? Because I think we have work we're going to have to do. So just to put that on notice that we have at least 5 or 10 minutes to talk about how we maybe need more than 3 meetings.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, could I also bring a point of...
Yes.
Le cas échéant, Monsieur le Président, est-ce qu'on peut repousser dans...
Mr. Chairman, in that case, could we postpone the deadline for submitting lists on the Wagner study? If we could postpone the beginning of the Wagner study to a later date?
It's up to the members to decide whether. Should we set aside 10 minutes next meeting?
Yes.
Just so we can
Yes.
discuss it, just so everyone's satisfied?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, could I interject?
This was a...
Non, mais je demande simplement...
No, I'm just asking for unanimous consent to start the Wagner study later.
But everyone agreed to the date of next Tuesday. What's wrong, Mr. Bergeron? This was what everyone agreed to in our last meeting.
Yes, I'm asking if there's a willingness to open that question.
But we
This is
discussed it at length in the last session, Mr.
What?
Bergeron. We discussed that very same date at
Yeah,
the
but
last
we're
session.
proposing to extend our study on that.
No, we don't know. He's just saying maybe we should discuss the possibility.
That's okay.
Thank you. Okay, so meeting is adjourned.
Mr.
Yes.
Chair, I
Sorry, Madam McPherson. My apologies. Yes.
Sorry, it's difficult sometimes to get attention when you're on Zoom. I will be in the room next week. I was just asking if it would be possible for the analysts to provide us with some recommendations with regards to the witnesses for the Wagner study. It is a broad study, and I also, along with Mr. Bergeron, would be open to postponing the beginning of that study. I do think that it became clear today that the sanction study will require more than the 3 meetings that we've identified. But I would like some support from the analysts on witnesses for the Wagner study, please.
Okay. Is that possible? So we need it by next, Monday? Can we get it by Monday? Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.